We have an editorial board of about 8 people and a room full of people that meet every day in the afternoon, and they look at all the choice they have and make the decision based on a lot of things, including instinct. It's an editorial decision. We probably have the freest media environment in all of television because we're not driven for numbers and we're not driven for advertisers. And the attitude on the part of the editorial board is, how do we balance this out? If we saw one side yesterday, how do we see this side? And that's why the more channels we have, the less power we have. You have one channel in your CBS, and you control the evening news show for 1/2 hour, and a third of the audience watching television is watching you, you got a lot of power. If you have 350 channels and you never have to go to the CBS evening news, you have a lot less power, and that's the same thing with anybody that owns an individual channel or has an individual control. We have 3 channels, a radio station, 10 websites, and that means it's all dispersed. It gives you an opportunity to watch all that stuff. So we just try to find as many things as we can afford to cover every day, given our budget. And if we had $100 million a year, we could cover half, we could double, triple what we cover now, but you haven't got enough time in the day to watch it all. So we have to, it's a constant decision along the way as to how much is this worth in the marketplace, how much can we spend that the industry will continue to support. And so you're constantly playing a game, and so that every day the decision's made on an editorial basis. Every day we do the House and the Senate. Every year we do the 2 governors' conferences. We cover everything that any Supreme Court justice will say about anything. We send our cameras out to whenever they allow us to be there. For instance, when Antonin Scalia, who I worked with years ago, in the Office of Telecommunications Policy, came to George Mason, he shut us out. And no matter how much I know him, he shuts us out almost all the time. And he and I quarrel about that in public, and where I'm coming from, I think he should have to let us in. Where he's coming from, he says, I don't care. I've got tenure, lifetime tenure. I don't answer to you. But one of the fun things about C-SPAN, anybody that watches this, and I have fun doing this, is when do we surprise you? When you tune in and all of a sudden you see something that you can't see anywhere else, that you sit home saying, this is really neat. Last night, this is not one of my favorite events, but we had the spina bifida roast on Bob Schieffer. The political junkies in this town that want to see Don Imus get up and give a speech in front of the spina bifida roast crowd loved it. Most people, it probably didn't have a big audience, but you could never see that. It wouldn't exist in your world if you lived in Pocatello, Idaho. You would never know that. And the town here is built around all these insider groups. Media knowing government, knowing media, and going to social events and cocktail parties and dinners and all this kind of stuff. And that's a part of the world that when I came here in the Navy, back in the early days that I described to you, going over to the White House and seeing what's going on over there, going to these dinners and realizing, I didn't know any of this existed. I've long since forgotten that it exists. That it didn't exist. 40 years I've been in this town, but it's constant for people out there your age who are learning for the first time how the place really works. And when we see this ugly story that made the news a couple of days ago about former Congressman Foley, that brings you really up close and personal as to what's going on. You can imagine, with all the money that's spent in this town, all the lobbyists involved, what's going on you can't see. And so the good news about the internet and little operations like ours and the other news networks is that we stand a chance of ginning up as much attention to all these different things, certainly as we've ever done in history, and hope that it will make a difference. Hasn't yet? Yes.
Can you say something about why the fact that Brian Ross decided to wait like 40 days before the election to unleash this whole story, since you mentioned it when it's been around for years?
I have no idea. We called Brian Ross yesterday and asked him to be on our show on Friday, and he declined, and he doesn't have to come on our show. It's not, but I have no idea why it happened. It's never what you think it is. I will guarantee you this, and I don't know Brian Ross. He didn't sit there on this and say, I'm going to wait till 40 days before the campaign. That's not the way it works. There's other reasons why it happened this way. He probably got a more substantive, either some of the IMs or whatever, that he didn't have that said this is a real story. But St. Petersburg Times, Fox News, and Miami Herald had these, and they didn't use them either. So I It's never quite what you think it is. People in this country love the sound bites and the conventional wisdom, but it's never quite what it looks like. Yes, Adam?
C-SPAN is seen outside the United States.
Not much.
There's a newsroom I visited in remote Africa, rural newsroom for a community station. They were taking a C-SPAN feed, taking clips of U.S. content for their local newscast. You get any compensation for that?
No. Years ago, and it's another interesting story, we were trying to get the WorldNet that was run by the United States Information Agency involved in carrying some of C-SPAN. They were carrying all the rest of the networks. And I was at my desk one day, and this was back in 1988. And it was in the middle of the whole Iran-Contra thing, and all of a sudden, I get a phone call from Charles Wick, who was the head of the USIA, and he was in a hurry. And he said, Brian, can we get an affiliate agreement from you to carry C-SPAN? And I said, gee, Mr. Wick, we've only been trying this for a couple of years. Why all of a sudden? He said, well, I just need it right away. And he said, how much will it cost us? And I said, well, because it's our taxpayers, it'll cost you $100 a year. And they have access, they have ever since, and they run it sometimes Fridays, weekends, and filling up the WorldNet. But there was a reason why he wanted that, and that was because the Congress was after him at the time to shut down the WorldNet, and he had to, he hasn't told me this, but I knew at the time what was going on. He had to justify keeping it on the air, and so he had to fill it up, and we were cheap, and so there we were, and we were glad to have it. But that's why so much of what goes on in your life, and I'm going to shut up in 2 seconds here, so much of what goes on in your life is happenstance. You need others. No matter what you think, how good you are, how smart you are, you need others. You need others a lot. If it wasn't for others, I wouldn't be standing here today. And let your instincts flow, but realize that along the way, you're going to meet all kinds of people. And I'll end it with this. 10 years ago, this year, this guy over here, Mr. Hazlett, who I always respected when I read him in the Wall Street Journal and other places, called up and asked to come to my office and interview me, of all people, for a Reason magazine. It's a libertarian magazine. And I said, yes, I'd love to meet Tom Hazlett. And he came in. He's not a journalist. He's a professor. And he sat down in my office, and that interview today still is the best interview that I've ever had done on a Q&A basis. It was all published in the magazine, and you can still find it by Googling it. And it's because I think on that day I was particularly irritated, and I was particularly honest. And you know, it's still to this day, when you put my name into Google, it pops up after 10 years, and I read it and glanced a couple of times when I read it 2 days ago getting ready for this, but you just never know when that's going to happen. And I know that this interview was very interesting because I really said what I believe about a lot of things about Washington, about the process and all this stuff, and not about politics in general, not about politicians in general, but I remember showing up at some event in the next couple of weeks, and Susan Ness, who was a friend, she'd been our banker before she went into the Federal Communications Commission, and we didn't agree on a lot of things, but she said, all she said to me was, I read your Reason magazine interview, and that's all she had to say. But anyways, enjoy being here. Thank you for being so attentive, and I hope this was worth your while. Appreciate it. If you didn't get either